Another possible explanation for earnings differentials in the economy is discrimination. People in minority groups, women, there are groups in the economy that some data indicate are discriminated against, and this could certainly be going on, although there are other explanations for differences in pay, and a lot of the differences in pay based on gender go away once you control for occupation, education, etc. But actually, what we see in gender discrimination is it's not so much discrimination against women, it's discrimination against women with children. We just don't have an infrastructure that supports both working and taking care of dependents at the same time, and women disproportionately bear that burden and pay the price in terms of their wages. But let's think a little bit about discrimination in the labor market. The classic type of labor market discrimination would be the employer discrimination. And here is where a company simply doesn't want to hire minority workers or women workers. There's just discrimination against those groups. And there's some evidence that this goes on. I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next slide. But there's conflicting results from empirical studies once we control for various factors. Say discrimination against African Americans. Well, African Americans are disproportionately likely to grow up in poor families, and the way we do education in the United States is that local schools are funded by local earners. So in some of the poorest neighborhoods, they also have some of the worst schools. So are we seeing discrimination against these people because of their skin color, or are we seeing a wage differential that results from the difference in the quality of educational opportunities that they've had? So it's there can be a lot of difficulty in determining what is discrimination and what is driven by other factors. African Americans, again, it's a terrible feature of our world, but African American men are just disproportionately likely to die young, and the data on African American men in the workforce are for relatively younger people that are relatively lower paid. So controlling for age, you see a great deal of that effect disappear. Anyway, it's not easy to get a good handle on these wage differentials. The other thing about employer discrimination is that it presents us with a logical puzzle, and that is, why can't an unbiased employer go out and hire all the minority workers? They're just as smart, just as qualified, but lower paid because of discrimination. Why not just create a business that only hires the similarly able but lower paid minority workers, and you're going to make a bunch more profits. And actually this process would tend to put upward pressure on the wages of those groups that are discriminated against. And I'll leave it at that. That's a conundrum. With that said, I've noticed in the economy that there's an apparent situation of cash on the table in the economy, and that is that there's just a ton of underemployed women, highly educated, highly skilled, but underemployed women in the economy. And it seems to me that somebody would come up with a institutional innovation that would enable a company to take advantage of all these relatively low wage for the skills they possess. Take advantage of this huge pool of highly skilled, underutilized labor by setting up an institutional structure where women, in particular it's women, but people taking care of families could work for 10, 20, 30 hours a week, leaving themselves time for taking care of children, etc. The company would be able to hire these workers for a song and make higher profits. Why? That opportunity is still out there, doesn't seem to go away, and I think it says something about the difficulty of the work tasks in such a way to take advantage of this talent. But this is an opportunity, and I just can't believe that nobody's taken advantage of it yet. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. Let's turn a little bit to some interesting empirical work in this area. So one of these studies that you read and you just wish, oh man, I wish I had thought of that, because it's just so clever and so relatively easy to do that it's just one of those things you read about and you think, why didn't I think of that? And anyway, one of those studies is a study by some economists that made up all these resumes. They gave all these people various employment histories and education histories and GPAs. They really finely crafted all these different resumes and cover letters to be very, very similar to one another across many dimensions. And then they sent out job applications to just thousands of companies and recorded what happened. And so some of these people were named, just typically vanilla white, waspy names. Emily Smith is the one that comes to mind for whatever reason. And then they put names, again, controlling for qualifications, they put names on other resumes that were like classically African-American names. And I could only think of LaToya Jackson, of course. I think that's Michael Jackson's sister. And, she'd probably get a lot of interest just for being famous, but I couldn't really think of a more clever name. But the point is, they thought of names that they ran by focus groups and the names that connoted likely African-American ancestry. Anyway, so they sent these resumes out and then waited for the callbacks, and if there were no discrimination by employers, you would expect a pretty similar rate of invitations for interviews for both types of resumes. And what they found was that the Emily Smith type resumes, the ones with white sounding names, whether, I don't have the best ear for that stuff, but maybe you know what I mean. Anyway, the rate at which those people got called in for interviews was just much higher than the rates that the people with African-American sounding names got called back. So that's some pretty solid evidence of employer discrimination. So that's out there, and to what degree does it determine wage differentials? That's a little bit harder to be precise about, but this is an issue in our economy for sure. Then there's some other types of discrimination. What if, we're in the United States of America, I'm thinking back to one of our military adventures where the French didn't go along with us, and there was this big backlash against French people. There were these, I won't use some of the adjectives that come to mind, but there were these people in the United States that would refuse to call French fries French fries. They called them freedom fries as a protest against the French. Anyway, let's suppose you run a restaurant and your customers are prejudiced against French people. So you don't have anything against French people, but your customers, if they had a French waiter serving them, they wouldn't come to your restaurant. Well, in that case, it'd be hard for you to, stick by your unbiased nature and hire French people. So, maybe this customer discrimination can explain some of what we see. And that would cause the wage differentials to persist in a way that we have seen them do. Another type of discrimination could result from coworker discrimination. And what if you had a situation where, the coworkers just didn't like French people, and so, if you hired a French person in, there'd just be tremendous unrest and drop productivity. Well, you might not be biased at all as the employer, but because your employees have this nature, you might well not hire French people. And I'm saying French people. It could be women, could be African Americans, could be whatever. But we see several avenues by which labor market discrimination can occur, and lower wages for minority or otherwise persecuted groups prejudiced against, groups experiencing prejudice could suffer lower wages as well.